Hello, I'm Jeff Paur, senior writer with RealTime Fantasy Sports. Welcome to the RealTime Fantasy Sports Show. It is time for hot plays, fades, and sleepers for Week 10 of the fantasy football season. Joined by my son, Henry Paur, once again. Henry, always enjoy doing the show with you. Appreciate you joining me again.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Henry, we missed it last week. I was in transit. Unfortunately, wasn't around to get the video done at the house this week, but last week I should say. But we're back. Sorry for everybody for missing out on that video in Week 9, but hopefully you had a lot of success in Week 9. A little bit of a up and down week, I felt like. I didn't have a very good week personally.
I had a good week. I won in most of my leagues this week.
So you had Jalen Hurts,
Devonta Smith, Bijan, those type of players.
That helps. Yeah, I definitely did not have a good week. This week, though, Week 10, we have 4 buys this week. Last week, I think we had 2. The 49ers and I can't remember.
Last week?
Yeah.
There's the 49ers and I can't remember either.
I can't. Steelers.
Oh, yep.
This week, the buys are the Browns, Packers, Raiders, and Seahawks. So some pretty good teams on a bye this week. 4 teams on a bye. And then we had the trade deadline this week. Tuesday was the trade deadline. Lots of movement happened, but did anything really move the needle for you? Jonathan Mingo goes to the Cowboys. Mike Williams to the Steelers, Preston Smith to the Steelers, Tre'Davious White was traded to the Ravens. You had Marshawn Lattimore to the Commanders. Anything move the needle for you at all, fantasy-wise?
Fantasy-wise, if we're going off that, I'd say maybe the Mike Williams can move the needle a little bit for the Steelers' offense, especially since we saw what he can be, like he was at the Chargers, and if he can come back to that type of role, he'd be a great fit there in Pittsburgh. Besides fantasy, Lattimore was a great pickup at the Commanders. That really is going to help their secondary, which is a desperate need for a contending team like them.
I agree. I think that's a big get for the Commanders. I agree with you, too. Mike Williams is probably the only one that really moves the needles for me from fantasy-wise, just because he's boom or bust. He can go off any given week. Russell Wilson likes to do the long ball there, so he could be a good fit, maybe have a couple big games, but I wouldn't count on anything too outstanding. All right, let's get into the hot plays, fades, and sleepers for Week 10, Henry. We're going to start with hot plays. We're going to give you one at each position, a QB, running back, receiver, tight end. We're going to start at QB as always. Who is your QB hot play?
I have a guy who he got it out right last week, finally looked like the offense we expected to see on Thursday Night Football on Halloween, and this week he now plays Arizona. I have Aaron Rodgers. He had 24 points last week. Seemed like he finally built that connection of Adams and Garrett Wilson, now building that offense together. They had 3 combined touchdowns. He had 3 in general, Aaron Rodgers. I think he had over 230 yards. He looked like a good Rodgers that we're used to seeing, and with this offense, I expect good things going forward, and he's a great matchup to start this stretch of need to make a run if they want to make the playoffs. So I think it starts now. It starts last week, but now it's going to continue to roll into this week against Arizona.
We'll see if he can keep it going. My QB is a guy who's actually been pretty good all year, and it's Sam Darnold. He's actually 9th overall in fantasy quarterback score, and I don't think many people had that. But he's had a big-time revival with Minnesota. I know he was kind of up and down last week with some bad turnovers, but still, he had 3 touchdowns, scored 24.9 fantasy points, played really well. He has 20-plus fantasy points 5 of 8 games. He showed really good consistency this year. I think he has a big game this week against Jacksonville. They allow the 2nd most fantasy points to quarterbacks, 31st overall against the pass. So I think Darnold has another big showing here in Week 10. All right, Henry, who is your running back hot play for this week?
I have Tyrone Tracy. I know last week was a little disappointing week, but they were committed to running the ball last week. And it seems like Tracy was that lead back, and he is a prime matchup this week against Carolina. We saw what he did 2 weeks ago against Pittsburgh, where he had some huge runs he broke off. I expect him to have some huge numbers in this one against Carolina. Very poor against the run. Alvin Kamara just ran all over them last week. I expect Tracy to continue his starting role and his stretch of dominance and continue it against Carolina.
So, kind of a similar theme to you. My running back is the guy who had his worst game of the season last week, and it's Kyren Williams. He scored just 10.5 fantasy points. So he scored just 10.5 fantasy points, still hit double-digit fantasy points. So that's really encouraging to me. That's some floor he has right now. He didn't score a touchdown last week. That was the first time all season. I think he finds the end zone this week against Miami. They've been really good against the pass, but not so good against the run. They allowed the 8th most fantasy points of running backs. They've allowed 140-plus rushing yards 3 of their last 5 games as well. I think Williams is going to get a big workload for this week for that Los Angeles Rams team. All right, Henry, let's talk about the receiver position. Who do you have as your hot play?
I have George Pickens versus the Commanders. I know they just added Mike Williams. Probably won't play a ton with just adding the offense. I know Washington just added Lattimore, but again, they're both probably not going to run the playbook very well. Don't expect them to play a ton. And Pickens has looked elite on the Russell Wilson so far, and he has a good matchup this week against Washington, which I expect this game actually to be might be a little high scoring in this one, if I'm being honest. Both offenses look pretty good. I know Pittsburgh has good defense, but Washington's look dominant. Could be a good game, and I think Pickens is a great showing in this game.
I like Courtland Sutton of the Denver Broncos. Always been a little bit of a polarizing figure, but man, he has been good since Bo Nix took over. He has double-digit targets 2 straight games. He's just racking up the looks. He threw a touchdown pass last week, has 2 straight 100-yard games. He's topped 15 fantasy points 4 of 6 games. Been really consistent. I don't care who they're playing right now. I think Sutton's almost a must-start as a number 2 fantasy receiver. Plays the Chiefs this week. That's a really tough matchup, but I could see the Chiefs getting up in this game. Nick's having to throw the ball. Sutton's a favorite target on the team. He's going to rack up the touches and yards once again. I think he's a great play in this matchup. All right, Henry, who's your last hot play for this week? It's the tight end position.
Mike Gesicki. Last 2 weeks, he's dominant. With T. Higgins out, Mike Gesicki's been that option for Joe Burrow. He looked elite last week, had 5 catches for 100 yards and 2 touchdowns, and he actually played 42% of the snaps.
Wow.
I expect him to play more snaps this week against a game against Baltimore. Last time they played, it was very high scoring. It was like 42-35 or something. So should be a lot of points to go around in this one. And with no Higgins most likely for Cincy, I think Mike Gesicki's going to have a way bigger role along with Chase, and I think he's a great showing in this win versus Baltimore.
Yeah, Higgins listed as doubtful. I don't think he plays. My tight end's a guy that's been shooting up the rankings lately. I actually had him first overall last week. Came through for me because he had a great game, and that's Cade Otton. I think he's matchup proof right now. I'm playing him no matter who is on the schedule for Tampa Bay with Mike Evans and Chris Godwin out. Otton's just racking up the targets, double-digit targets, 3 straight games, at least 8 catches all of those games. He's topped 21 fantasy points 2 straight. Clear top option in this passing game right now. That Tampa Bay offense does a great job of finding ways to move the ball, even with injuries. I think the offensive coordinator has just been great. Baker Mayfield as well. Cade Otton's going to keep it rolling this week against the 49ers. They actually have struggled against the tight end some this season as well, so I think that bodes well for Otton even more. All right, opposite end of things, Henry, how about some fades, some players we don't like too much this week you might consider sitting?
I have Javonte Williams to start it off. He plays Kansas City this week, who we've seen they've been unbelievable at stopping the run this year. They were great last week against Tampa, and I don't think either back really got anything going for them. And Javonte's been up and down so far this year. A lot of his work has come through being able to get in the end zone and getting over 70-plus yards. That's where most of his good games have come from. I don't think he's going to get either in this tough matchup this week. Maybe a couple catches, but I'd worry about Javonte in this one versus Kansas City.
I'll give you a running back as well, and it's Chase Brown. So he's been playing a lot better with Zach Moss out of the lineup. He actually had a season-best 26.7 fantasy points last week, his first 100-yard rushing game of the season. They've brought in Khalil Herbert, though. They want to lessen the load for Brown. They think they've been working him too much. And I think he could struggle this week against Baltimore. In week 5 against Baltimore, he did score a touchdown. He had just 54 yards on 15 touches in that game, though. So if he doesn't score, he's not a help for fantasy teams. I think he's held out of the end zone this week, so I think his numbers are going to be down. From a fantasy perspective, I know it's hard to sit him with how well he's been playing lately, but I worry about him in this matchup against the Ravens. They allow just 75.7 rushing yards per game, first overall against the run. All right, Henry, who's another fade for you?
I have a guy, I did talk about this game because I thought it was going to be high scoring, but I do worry about this guy in this one, though, and that's Brian Robinson. He was out last week. I don't remember the injury. Was it his knee injury again?
It's a hamstring now that he's dealing with.
He was limited today in practice. I would assume he's on track to play this week, most likely.
Yeah.
And Pittsburgh's been great against the run this year as well as Kansas City we just talked about, but I worry about Robinson. Most of his production has come through. He's getting in the end zone most weeks. If he doesn't get in the end zone most weeks, he hasn't been productive. And this week's going to be a tough matchup, tough sledding against a good Pittsburgh D-line who actually already added more at the deadline. They added Preston Smith, so their D-line's getting better. And I expect them to air it out against a weak secondary of Pittsburgh this week, so I'd worry about Brian Robinson.
So I got a quarterback next on my fade list for this week, and that's Kyler Murray. He's actually been really up and down this season. He has 2 straight games with 22-plus fantasy points. He had 2 straight games with 22-plus fantasy points before putting up just 7.3 fantasy points last week. This was his worst fantasy game of the season, but he has 5 games total with fewer than 20 fantasy points. I always think 20 fantasy points is that threshold I want to reach. You go over that, that's a solid week. Under that, not so good. And he's been under it 5 times this year, Murray. I think he does it again this week against the Jets. Really good against the pass. They allow the 4th fewest fantasy points to quarterbacks. I think Murray's going to struggle in this matchup. All right, Henry, who's your last fade for the week?
Well, ironically, I had the wide receiver for him, and that's Marvin Harrison. Marvin Harrison, another player, like you just mentioned in Murray, over that threshold. He's barely gotten over, I think he's over 100 yards in 2 games this year, and the rest he's under 60, I believe. I know he's gotten in the end zone 5 times, but he's looked poor in a couple of these games. It seems like some of these games they choose to run the ball, don't incorporate the passes a lot, and then there's some weeks where they just don't look for him. Like last week, they ran the ball 34 times. Nothing he can do. And even when he caught the ball, he fumbled. The week before, he had a good week, I believe, against the Chargers. No, we didn't have a good week against the Chargers. It was a good week against Miami. But he's been very up or down every other week, and this week he has the best team in the league against the pass. He'd go up against either Sauce Gardner or DJ Reed the entire game. As a rookie, I'd be very worried about Marvin Harrison in this one.
Why don't they just force feed him the ball like Malik Neighbors? Just throw it to him nonstop.
You see what it does for New York? They moved the ball. In the second half, they moved the ball better when they actually threw in the ball.
I don't get it. Take advantage of your talent. They don't do it. So I'm going to give you a receiver as well, Henry, for a fade. That's Quentin Johnston. So he actually had a great game last week. Returned to the lineup, had his first 100-yard game of the season, scored 22 fantasy points in the game, but I still think he's really a boomer bust play. He has 3 games with fewer than 7 fantasy points. So he's really been bad when he hasn't had that big game. He just doesn't produce a lot when it comes to the reception totals. He's more of a big play threat. I don't like him to do well this week against Tennessee. They're first overall against the pass. They allow just 155.8 passing yards per game. I think Johnson's a risky play this week. A risky play this week for fantasy owners. I would just stay away from him. I don't mind picking him up, put him on my roster, but I'm not going to play him this week if he's available in your league. All right, Henry, let's talk about sleepers, some guys flying under the radar that could end up doing pretty well this week. Who's your first sleeper for the week?
I have a guy who probably had his best week of the year last week with Bryce Young returning out of lineup, and that's Jatavion Sanders, who plays the Giants. He had 4 catches last week for 87 yards. Looked like a big target in Bryce Young's offense when he threw the ball. It looked for him a lot, it looked like, especially on 3rd downs. I think he had like 6 or 7 targets alongside this. I think they'll probably have to throw the ball in this game, most likely. I know the Giants' defense overall isn't the best, but Bryce Young looked pretty good last week. I was happy to see him finally get a win. All the weapons looked pretty solid. Looked like a well-organized offense with young talent that could succeed going into the future. I hope Bryce Young's the future. And I think Jatavion Sanders is a big part of this. He's been incorporated, I think, more and more as the season goes on. I see the talent from him. And I think this week's a great week to keep his streak going.
So it seems like we're really targeting this game because I have someone from the Giants as well. You have Tracy, Sanders, we've talked about. So I have another person from this Giants-Panthers game. That's Daniel Jones. So he is so hard to trust. You never know what he's going to do, but he has a really high ceiling, a really low floor. But when he goes off, he really has the big game. He scored 27.1 fantasy points last week, scored 3 total touchdowns in the game, 2 passing, 1 rushing. He has 4 games this year with 20-plus fantasy points, so he's really been a good on occasion. And the receiver position's healthy, doing better for the Giants now, so I think he's primed for another game with 20-plus fantasy points against the Panthers this week. They allow the 6th most fantasy points quarterbacks, 25th overall against the pass. I think Jones is a good streaming option in Week 10. All right, Henry, who's your last sleeper for the week?
I have Noah Brown. Last week he had one of his best games of the year. He had 6 catches for 60 yards. I know the week before that, I'm going to say he doubled the points last 2 weeks, but I will say the week before came mostly off a Hail Mary catch.
That's true.
But he has looked good. It seems like they're trying to target more players in this offense. They haven't found that true wide receiver 2 yet. It seems like in Washington, I thought they may trade for someone at the deadline. They went to stick with what they got. They saw Noah Brown go for 6 for 60 on Sunday. Maybe they think they have him as their number 2 now. I think he's going to be better this week against a game where they probably have to air it out against Pittsburgh. They didn't do the best job of that last week, so they may try to do a little more this week. So I think Noah Brown should have a solid game this week against Pittsburgh.
I picked him up in one of my leagues, and I'm actually starting him as well.
I'm doing the same thing.
All right, so hopefully it pans out for us this week. My last sleeper is a tight end, always a tough position to figure out. It's been a little better lately, but still a little tough position, especially when there's buys. And I have Jonnu Smith of the Miami Dolphins. Hasn't really been off the charts this year, but pretty consistent. He has at least 4 receptions, 4 straight games, caught 5 passes last week, and has at least 6 targets, 4 straight games. I think the return of Tua Tagovailoa is really a big positive for Smith as well, and the Dolphins' passing game. I think he's going to have a good game this week against the Los Angeles Rams. They've really struggled to stop the tight end, allow the 6th most fantasy points to tight ends this season. So I think Smith is a good streaming option for Week 10. All right, Henry, those are our hot plays, fades, and sleepers for Week 10 of the fantasy football season. As always, thanks for coming on. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem.
Good luck in your games this week. Hope you have a lot of success, and I hope I do better this week than last week.
Good luck to you as well. Hope you do better.
Should be a good week of games as well. There's some good ones on the slate. We have 4 teams on a bye. Once again, Browns, Packers, Raiders, and Seahawks, but hopefully that doesn't impact you too much. Have a lot of success this week. I hope you have a lot of fun and a lot of enjoyment watching those games and winning. This has been Jeff Paur for RealTime Fantasy Sports. Have a great day.